and systematically eliminate the Bible, that all have failed," unquote. As far as deception is concerned, that comment is probably the clincher. The burning and the banning throughout the centuries has been on the part of those supporting the Bible, not those who are trying to reveal it for what it is. If there has been any persecution, it has been by people who support the book, not those opposed to it. Tyndale, Bruno, Servetus, Savonarola, and many others were executed for opposing orthodox teachings, and thousands of others were imprisoned. Protestants were as guilty as Catholics. That accounts in large measure for the fact that the Bible is so prominent today. Its opponents were eliminated. The burning and banning of religious books, individuals, and artifacts throughout history has been by other religious groups, not atheists, agnostics, humanists, and other freethinkers. When religious groups came to America and spoke of religious freedom, they meant freedom for themselves, not other religious groups. Catholics in control of Maryland and Protestants in control of Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, for example, made sure that activities by other religious groups were either severely restricted or abolished altogether. Having read their Bible and knowing all too well what Israelites, acting under God's orders, had done to tribes in Palestine, they were certainly not going to be advocates of free speech. Far from it. The Inquisition, the Crusades, the religious trials of the Middle Ages, the St. Bartholomew Day Massacre, and the wars between Catholics and Protestants were carried out by those who believe most in Jesus and the Bible. Governments were invariably composed most of those in cahoots with biblicists in the Bible. Rulers relied heavily upon the divine right of kings concept to justify their control. And verses like those found in the 13th chapter of Genesis, 13th chapter of Romans, were cited as proof. Political leaders were to be obeyed because God said so. Religious and political leaders have always worked closely together, often resembling Siamese twins. With few exceptions, each has supported the other's powers and outrages. And for those opposed to religion in general, and the Bible in particular, that has spelled disaster. The more biblically oriented people have been, the more intolerant they have been. And that continues to be evident in society today. A man of my acquaintance recently made a good statement in this regard. He said, quote, "If you think it's hard living as a Bible believer in this nation, you ought to try living as not one. Your chance of being elected to political office, for example, is much greater if you say you believe in Jesus and the Bible than if you say you do not." In conclusion, our last 5 programs have sought to cover in a reasonably comprehensive manner such topics as inerrancy, the canon's formation, excluded books, the originals, variations, copyist errors, and other major topics relative to the Bible's development, and to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that the Bible is not to be trusted either from an historical or a textual perspective. We'd like to wrap up today's program by reading a letter from a subscriber in Canada. He says, quote, "Oh, bless you, sir. You've taken a most disgusting chore off my hands. I can't stand that book. It gives me a headache. I open it looking for 2 things: a clear and straightforward explanation of Christian theology and eloquent examples of Christian mercy. There is not much of either. Thank you for making some sense out of it. Perhaps you could set up a home study Bible course. I agree with you that the free thought movement needs its biblical experts to point out to the fundamentalists that the Bible does in fact have errors and contradictions. Personally, I don't care what people do in the privacy of their own pews. Members of the moral majority, however, are going for political power and taking their Inquisition-type mindset with them. This was written before the moral majority became defunct and was replaced by other fundamentalist groups. If our current economic woes deepen, we will see a desperate casting about for something to believe in, something sure, rock solid, and fundamental. I don't think the troubles of Baker and Swaggart will hurt the cause of fundamentalism, but rather they will cause people to turn to something even more rigid, more uncompromising, and that worries me greatly." Unquote. That completes our presentation, and please join us later for the 23rd edition of Biblical Errancy Commentary, when we'll continue showing why the Bible is nothing more than the flawed composition of some fallible human beings. Thank you for listening.